Last lecture, we looked at the overall structure of the skeletal muscle, with the big emphasis on muscle fiber equals muscle cell. Today, we're taking a little bit closer look at that muscle cell and checking out how it is alike and different from the little generic cells we talked about in bio, the little globby animal cells. There are some differences, but what you're going to see is that overall, other than the fact that the muscle cell is specified to contract, it's specified for its one single purpose of contraction. Other than that, the structures are very similar. Like all cells, muscle cells have distinct structures with distinct functions. If you check out that picture, the little wheel-looking picture, you'll see that they have thick and thin myofilaments labeled. Those are your filaments with myosin and actin. We'll talk a lot more about those. What's happened with the cell, what you're looking at, is that the outer membrane has been peeled up, and you're looking inside the muscle cell, the muscle fiber. Muscle fiber equals muscle cell. We talked last time about the nucleus in the muscle cell. The fact that the nucleus is the control center, but that muscle cells need to have many nuclei because they're so big. I gotta get my board out for this one. Now, if you know anything about dinosaurs, and this is kind of a weird thought to put dinosaurs in anatomy class, but if you know anything about dinosaurs, especially the Stegosaurus, he was a big guy. He was a big boy with a big old club on his tail and spikes on his back, and about all he was good at was being big. He had a little peanut brain. So let's see what I can do here. There's his little Stegosaurus head. And there's his big old Stegosaurus body with some Stegosaurus spines on it. Big old ogre tail. Little tiny head. And big old Stegosaurus legs on there. There he is, Stegosaurus. Now, when scientists found fossils of these not all that long ago, they really were amazed because the way the fossil looked, it looked like Stegosaurus had a brain in his head and a brain in his butt. That would kind of make sense because if you got a little peanut at this end of something the size of a school bus or bigger, this end isn't going to work so well. Even my dog, she's an ogre, she gets out of control with her wiggling, and the back end doesn't quite control like the front end when she gets excited. So it would make sense. What scientists later discovered is it wasn't actually a second brain, but it was a ganglion, which is a cluster of nerves. So the brain and the little peanut head would send information to the cluster of nerves at his back end, and the nerves themselves worked the back end. It wasn't two separate brains, but it was two separate control centers because Stegosaurus was so long and bulky that one control center wasn't enough to keep the whole thing moving. That's why muscle cells have multiple nuclei, because a single nucleus in a cell the length of a muscle, or close to the length of a muscle, isn't going to make it. It's not going to provide control for the entire cell. So multiple nuclei work together to control the whole thing. Sarcoplasm is cytoplasm. Plasm is goo. Sarco is a prefix you're going to see meaning muscle, and it's usually seen with muscle cell. So sarcoplasm is muscle cell goo, just like cytoplasm is a regular cell goo. I had my freshman bio kids build a jello cell one year, and I was cleaning cytoplasm off the back wall for a while. I don't know how the jello got there, but it got there. Cytoplasm is sticky. It's a little liquidier than jello, but it's sort of the idea. Sarcolemma, the sarcolemma is what's flapped up in your picture, and it's the cell membrane. We talked about endomysium as a membrane outside each cell. It's different. The sarcolemma is part of the cell, and the endomysium wraps it as fascia, as connective tissue. Mitochondria, everybody's buddy, the powerhouse of the cell. We're going to look more at mitochondria and their role in energy production coming up. But like the nuclei, It's really critical for muscle cells to have extra mitochondria because of their purpose of contraction. If a muscle cell runs out of energy, it's no longer able to contract, and then what good is it? If it's your legs or your arms, it stinks because you're tired. If it's your heart, that's even worse because it needs to keep beating. You might remember endoplasmic reticulum ER, rough and smooth, you got the ribosomes or not, in a standard cell from bio. Sarcoplasmic reticulum is the same thing. Sarco, again, muscle cell. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is really important. In your picture, it's the air duct looking things. It's the long straws that go the length of the muscle cell. We're going to look at its role in carrying ions, specifically calcium coming up, and it transports material, the length of the cell. So your sarcoplasmic reticulum, when I drew endoplasmic reticulum in my bio classes, I went like this. Because it was like a scribble. It was sort of crinkly. Because in an animal cell or a rounder cell, it only needs to go like gig. In the sarcoplasmic reticulum with, again, the length of the muscle cell, it's got a long way to go, so it's straight. The cisternae are the larger areas on the SR and the transverse tubules. They're storage areas. A cistern's a vat. It stores water. It stores a liquid. And that's what cisternae do, but they store the ions that we're going to need for muscle contraction. Transverse tubules go the width of the cell. They make a grid with the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and they connect to the outside. So they're pretty cool because they cut across. They're the short way. Transverse, like our transverse plane goes our short way, where our sagittal and frontal planes go our long way. Transverse is across here too. And sarcomere, you're going to hear a lot more about sarcomeres coming up. Sarcomeres are the contractile unit of the muscle cell. If you think about it, if I took a giant rubber band and hooked it to something about 20 feet away and tried to pull, the rubber band's only going to stretch so much. I can only pull on one large rubber band so much. But if I could make magic rubber bands, where I could hook 50 of them together end to end, and when I pulled on one, each individual rubber band would shorten. I would get much more efficient shortening if I could shorten each rubber band on its own, rather than one large rubber band. The sarcomere divides my muscle cell, and we're going to see how next lecture. It divides the muscle cell, and then, instead of a whole muscle cell trying to shorten, I shorten little bits at a time and get much more efficient shortening. Sarcomere is big. Sarcomere is going to be our big idea for the next couple of days. And hopefully, when we look back in a few days, you'll see why it's so important and why it's such a good idea to shorten sections of the muscle cell individually. Well, for me and my extinct friend here, have a great day.